there's a lot of horror vacui, so lots of stuff in it. So that's a bit of a challenge because it's huge and then so much in it, but I hope to point out the major portions and how they interact with the central portion.
But it's phenomenal how much, like all these, and it's interesting how they have, seen each other's works and taken inspiration from them. It's interesting. Yeah. Like today we read peer journals and reviews and, publications of each other's work and then build upon it.
Yeah.
So I have all these people at that time and traveling at that time,
Traveling, that's the thing. They didn't have photography. They had to sketch or they had to wait for a print to be created and then,
go and see and then inform their work. It's phenomenal. It's really, really, it's interesting. And also the intrigues, like people pulling down other people. It's a human trait. It's, not about this civilization or that.
That's something I find very interesting, fun, looking at the documents in the Italian archives, because there's certain times when, everyone's silent and then I just want to laugh because I'm reading something very petty or, sarcastic, and it's so, I don't know, it's fascinating. It's interesting. It's fun.
But it's also very interesting the way these are all sort of linking up with each other, Mantua, Padua always comes into the picture when these guys are working. It's interesting. Michelangelo Sistine stuff comes in here. It's
Anupam, it's 11 in my clock.
Yes, it's 11 on my clock too. So we have a good mix of people here. Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us once again for the next lecture in this series. This conceived by Signora Costanza of the Consul General at the Italian Consulate in Mumbai, and now taken forward by Francesca Mendola, the director of the Italian Cultural Center, the Istituto Italiano di Cultura in Mumbai. We've had a series of very, very interesting talks which have opened out the world of Italian, not just Italian frescoes, but specifically the frescoes on the ceilings in various places in Italy, and how they are also colligated with each other. It's interesting, the narration that Reshma has so magically woven literally on this tapestry on walls, so they say. Architects call it the architectural fabric with some reason, Yeah. It's a nice term that they use. And ladies and gentlemen, then I think because she has such lovely visuals and the questions are always numerous and interesting and deep and various. So Reshma, I would request you also to announce the title in your own words and your little introductions that you would like to give. And ladies and gentlemen, Reshma Nayyar for you.
Thank you, Anupam. Let me just get the PowerPoint up on the screen and then I'll begin. Okay, so today's lecture is the fifth in a series on illusionistic ceiling paintings in Renaissance and Baroque Italy. So from the 15th to the 17th centuries. Today we're going to look at two ceilings that were painted in a single structure, in a single building. The building was a very luxurious new residence that had been commissioned by the Barberini family in Rome. So it's called the Palazzo Barberini, the Barberini family palace. A very wealthy family that had reached the peak of Roman society because Cardinal Maffeo Barberini was elected Pope in 1623. Within a few years, he had purchased land which already had a palace, and his nephew, he had three nephews, a residence was built for the family. So as Pope, he lived in the Papal Palace, but the family lived in the Barberini Palace. The image you're looking at, and please don't worry if you can't make out details at the moment, we will look at close-ups eventually. The image you're looking at is the frescoed ceiling decoration of the grand hall, the formal reception room, the most regal of the rooms in the palace. And a few years, this was this ceiling, which I have called the Triumph of Divine Providence, but is also referred to as the Allegory of Divine Providence, was decorated by the artist Pietro da Cortona. Just a year or so before Cortona began painting the ceiling, Andrea Sacchi had finished painting the ceiling of a much smaller room in the same palace. And that was the ceiling of an antechamber to the family chapel. So within the palace, within the residence, there was a small, very, very small chapel. And in the room in front of the chapel, so the chapel could barely hold a couple of people inside, but the room leading into the chapel was a little larger, nowhere as large as the Gran Salone or the Great Hall. But the antechamber of the chapel has another important ceiling decoration, and that was by Andrea Sacchi, and it's called the Allegory of Divine Wisdom. These titles are descriptive titles, so you'll find different names depending on the source you look at. The important thing to remember is the antechamber has as its central figure divine wisdom, and the Great Hall has as its central figure divine providence here. Okay, so divine providence and divine wisdom. Okay. Very quick, in Hindi, this is how you would write Saki. So don't get confused by seeing that H, it's just pronounced Saki. So Pietro da Cortona, whom I'll probably refer to as Cortona, and Andrea Sacchi, whom I'll probably refer to as Saki. Okay, I want you to note that in Sacchi's ceiling, the entire, it's a square ceiling, and it has a lightly curved vault, I think. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's a lightly curved vault. In the corners, you have siren figures, okay? And the siren figures in the four corners, so here, here, and in the other two corners, hold up above their heads representations of the sun, okay? We will look at the Barberini coat of arms, which has certain symbols that deal with the are associated with the Barberini family. The sun is one of those symbols. The others are laurel leaves and bees, okay, honeybees. Okay. This is the exterior of the main facade of the Palazzo Barberini. I'll just point out on this image that I took from Google Maps. What we are looking at, the view we're looking at, the photographer is probably standing here, sorry, not here, and taken a picture of this area. So this portion is here, okay? And on the first floor, so above the ground floor, this area behind this is the Gran Salone, the main hall. So on the first floor, the Gran Salone is in this area. It's important to be aware of a few facts about members of the Barberini family because it will help you recognize references to them in the artworks they commission. So as I mentioned, the symbols of the Barberini are bees, the sun, and laurel leaves. Pope Urban the VIII was a very erudite man. So he had studied canon and civil law. He was also superstitious. So he had an advisor who advised him not only on astronomy, which is and was a science, but also astrology, which at the time was considered science by at least by Urban the VIII and some others. He was also a poet. He had published his poetry before becoming Pope. And his three nephews included two cardinals and one, what you would call one secular nephew, who was given a title. I think he was the prefect of Rome. So these were, in a sense, posts that came with a lot of income and maybe not so many responsibilities. Okay? Taddeo Barberini was married to Anna Colonna. The name Colonna, the word Colonna means column. So in a lot of artwork that was commissioned by the Colonna family, which is one of the older, a much more, a family with a much better social lineage than the Barberini, who were relatively newcomers to high society. So in artworks commissioned by the Colonna, you will often find columns. And when Anna Colonna married Taddeo Barberini, you can be reasonably sure that if you see an artwork that has a column, there is a likelihood. It's not always going to be the case because columns appear in a lot of artworks anyway, but there's a reference to Anna Colonna's family name. Okay. The image you're looking at over here is a print from a book that was commissioned by the Barberini family called the Aegis Barberini, which included printed plates with artworks they had commissioned. So over here, you can see laurel leaves and columns. So likely they refer to Anna Colonna and the Barberini. This is another print from the Aegis Barberini, and it has a portrait of Pope Urban the VIII. Let's look at what attributes we have in this. Note this little boy on the right, the book that he carries, and the cover has the sun, another Barberini emblem. Look at the finials of this mantle piece and the sides. There are bees, all references to the Barberini family. And of course, this is Pope Urban the VIII. The cap that the Pope is wearing is called a camauro. There is another much more formal piece of headgear that popes wear, which is called the Papal Tiara. And so on the facade of the building, and this is almost every papal commission will have this, you have the coat of arms of the Barberini with the bees, and the papal coat of arms, which is the crossed keys of St. Peter and the papal tiara. So I have put an image of Pope Benedict wearing the papal tiara and an image of a tiara on display to give you a sense of what it looks like, because we will actually see that in the painting of the Gran Salone. Okay, we're going to begin with Andrea Sacchi's Divine Wisdom, because that was painted first. As I mentioned, this is comparatively, it's a private commission, you could say, or rather a commission meant for private consumption. because it would not have been seen by every visitor to the palace, whereas you can be quite sure that every important visitor to the palace was received in the main hall. Okay, so it's a square ceiling, and apart from these 4 sirens at the edges that hold up the Barberini sun, there is no depiction of architecture. There is in the center a sun, a throne, which I'm going to show you some details because it's really important. There are lions on the side of the throne. There is a figure which represents divine wisdom, and I'll get to why that's the case. And on her breast, there is another disc representing the sun. Now, we know from contemporary sources that the subject of this decoration comes from one of the parts of the Bible. So it's not, it's one of the apocryphal books. It's the book of wisdom. Its implied author is King Solomon, and its implied readers are rulers. Okay? And there are specifically 2 books, 2 parts of the book of wisdom, chapters 7 and 8. So if anybody's interested, you know, if you read that, I'm sure the text is available online, and you read about each quality of divine wisdom, you'll be able to associate those with the figures on either side of the throne of divine wisdom. Now, I'd like to take a few minutes to just talk about what's happening here. We're not looking at a narrative scene. This is not a story. It's an allegory. So to make it very simple, if you just think about a court of law and the symbol of justice, okay? So justice is not a person, it's a concept, it's a quality, but most courts of law will have a depiction sculpted or painted of a blindfolded woman carrying the scales of justice. And that is a personification of justice. So what we see in Sacchi's composition is a personification of the quality of divine wisdom. Okay? She sits on the throne of Solomon, Solomon the Wise. Okay. In addition, the figures who flank her are personifications of qualities of divine wisdom. Okay? I'll come to that list in a moment, but what I'd like you to keep in mind as we look at the details is that the message over here is more than just a celebration of the quality of divine wisdom. It is also that Pope Urban VIII, in whose family palace this is to be found, is an embodiment in a way of divine wisdom. Okay? He is guided, well, embodiment may be a little too far-fetched. He is guided by divine wisdom in his actions. So just to go away from the hagiography to history, Pope Urban VIII was he was both, like all popes, secular, a temporal ruler, as well as a spiritual leader. So he was the ruler of the Catholic Church. He was also the ruler of the Catholic domains, which included Rome and various other cities and areas. He was extremely focused on expanding this territory. Okay? And to this end, he undertook a lot of defensive work and spent a lot of money on building up an arsenal of weapons. Okay, the idea behind a composition like Divine Wisdom is to um, combine rule, the temporal rule as the head of the papal states with the Pope's role as a spiritual leader. Okay, this will become much clearer when we look at Pietro da Cortona's fresco. For now, let's just look at, and I've got over here a print just because the figures are easier to read visually. And there are various, so these are the figures: nobility, eternity, justice, fortitude. These are all qualities of divine wisdom who is seated on the throne in the center. Each of the qualities she has. So let me just show you, for instance, let's see, justice. Okay. This, oops, just one moment. For some reason, my stylus isn't working, which is really annoying. Just one moment. Yeah. This figure here is justice, and here are the scales, okay, which are her attribute. So justice, holding her left hand, she holds the scales. So you can't make out very clearly unless you look closely. But if you are familiar with the Book of Wisdom, okay, if you know what the attributes of divine wisdom are, you would easily identify this figure as justice. Similarly, I'll just go very quickly to two of the other figures. This figure with the triangle is divinity, because the triangle was often taken to represent the Christian Trinity. Also, God was represented as an architect. So the triangle is the tool of the architect. This figure here who looks up at divine wisdom is perspicacity, and her attribute is the eagle. Now, one point to keep in mind there, that each of these figures in this print does not have something very important that is actually on the ceiling. So when we look at the details of the ceiling, you will notice that each of these figures has at least one star next to them, because they also represent constellations. For example, justice represents the constellation Libra, okay, the scales, the balance. Then the eagle, perspicacity, the eagle represents Aquila, the eagle constellation, and so on. So I have that over here, the list. In addition, there are two airborne figures. The one on the right is accompanied by a rabbit. The one on the left is accompanied by a lion. They are Amor and Timor. So Amor is love. So it's love of God, and Timor is fear of God. And they are, this is, the rabbit is the constellation Lepus, and the lion is Leo Minor. Okay, now when you actually enter the room, okay, so if the viewer is standing here at lower right, okay, and then looking up, this is how it is oriented. So the chapel is actually off here. The entrance to the chapel is on this wall, okay? And when you're here and you look up, more or less the view you get is what the photograph on the left. It's difficult to photograph this space, which is why I showed you the print earlier. So upper right, you can see the Amor with the rabbit. Here's divine wisdom, and the perspicacity with the eagle, and justice with the scales, and the other attributes, the other qualities of divine wisdom with their attributes. Let me just see if I can show you the stars here. Okay, this dot on the eagle's chest is supposed to be a star. This figure with a lock, with basically locks of hair in her hand has stars in them. This is a constellation called the Comes Berenices, the locks of Berenice's hair. And every figure, if you look closely, has the stars. It's not very visible in my photograph. So just above the triangle of divinity over here, there's a star. And as I mentioned, this is a very interesting figure, the figure that you see from viewed from the back. So she holds a huge club, which has a star on it. She represents fortitude, and the constellation is Hercules. This is the club of Hercules. Okay. Another constellation represent a corona by the crown of stars. Okay, I think you get a sense of how each figure represents a personification, and that personification is a quality of divine wisdom. One of the most important things to understand how closely this fresco is linked, this decoration is linked with Urban VIII is a study, and I am not, I won't be able to explain how that works, but in the positioning of each of these figures, okay? If you were to study carefully the positioning in relation to each other, it is actually the equivalent of an astronomical map, and an accurate one at that, not in terms of distance, but in terms of position. And if you were to read the map, you would be able to pinpoint the date that this composition refers to. And that date is 6th of August, 1623, the day Cardinal Maffeo Barberini was elected Pope. Okay? So very quickly, you have the sirens holding the sun, you have the central image, a sun disk, in front of which you have divine wisdom seated on a throne. She has the sun emblazoned on her breast over here. And so this image you can actually see. So these little dots, yellow dots that you see, they're all stars. They all represent a constellation. Okay, now, you know what this composition on the left means. Andrea Sacchi's Allegory of Divine Wisdom. It's not simply a representation of divine wisdom and her attributes. It is also a message. It is also a composition that links the reign of Urban VIII as Pope with the quality of divine wisdom and all its ancillary qualities. On the right, you have Pietro da Cortona's Allegory or Triumph of Divine Providence. This figure is Divine Providence. Okay, so this is the focal point of Pietro da Cortona's fresco. For now, I only want to point out the layout in very broad terms. Okay, so this is a vaulted ceiling, and everything in it is painted. Okay, everything in it is fresco. The way Pietro da Cortona has arranged his composition is as if there is a stucco or stone frame So these portions that I'm just coloring with my stylus represent an architectural structure, okay? And in the center, where divine providence is the focal point, you have a view open to the sky. We will look at details. I will tell you what's happening there. But for now, I want you to understand something very simple but very important. In the four side panels, so the two long panels and the two short panels, you have narrative scenes, and the way they have been conceived in terms of their subject matter and in terms of their visual composition, they relate to the central panel. Okay? We will look at how that happens. I want to talk a little about a very important debate that took place in the Academy of St. Luke in Rome. So St. Luke is the patron saint of artists. So the artists had an academy named after him. And both Andrea Sacchi and Pietro da Cortona were members. Pietro da Cortona was the director of the academy for, I think, about 2 years. And there is a source dating to about 100 years later that records a debate that took place between Andrea Sacchi and Pietro da Cortona in the academy. And Andrea Sacchi argued for simple compositions that were easy to read, okay? So visually easy to understand, to grasp and understand. He emphasized clarity, and for this, he felt that 10 figures is more or less the maximum, around 10 figures, not more than that, okay? Because otherwise there's too much of detail and the main message gets lost. Pietro da Cortona, on the other hand, argued for complex compositions, and he argued specifically that there is always one main theme, but the whole composition is made much richer when there are subsidiary themes that are interwoven into the entire composition. And the two ceilings that the artists painted in the Palazzo Barberini beautifully illustrate their theoretical outlook towards devising compositions. Okay,
Reshma,
so yes.
Reshma, just before we move on to this, let's clear some 2-3 questions that are in context. One is that Andrea Sacchi's representation on the ceiling, people want a clarification whether this was a flat ceiling or again a curved ceiling.
So I think it was lightly curved. Okay, I'm not 100% sure. I'm reasonably sure it was lightly curved.
And then, though it has been explained earlier, but if you don't mind, just a recapitulation of the significance of the bees. I mean, this is the Barberini.
The bees, sure. Every noble family had a coat of arms, and they had certain symbols that appeared on their coat of arms, and it could be a combination, it could be a single one, and usually, or very often, these symbols punned on their family names. For example, Ana Colonna, the Colonna family, and the column. Okay? In the case of the Barberini family, some of the symbols that are related to their family are the bees, laurel leaves, and the sun. Okay? So the bees are a Barberini symbol. If you go to Rome and you walk around, almost every building will have a coat of arms on top, not necessarily a papal coat of arms. You always know it's a papal commission when there is the papal tiara and the cross keys, because that signifies it's a papal commission. But in the, where did that go? Yes, in the coat of arms itself, usually you can identify some of the very common ones are the bees for the Barberini. There was a pope whose family name was Montalto. He sometimes has little mountains. The Chigi Pope had stars, mountains. So the bees are a Barberini symbol. Very close to the Barberini Palace. Some of you might have visited the Triton Fountain, and close to it is the Fountain of the Bees. It's a Barberini, both the fountains are Barberini commissions, but the Fountain of the Bees literally has the bees, you know, it's telling you straight out, I was commissioned by the Barberini family.
Thank you, Reshma. I think this explains it.
Okay.
And in fact, you will see the bees also when you go to the details of this painting too.
Yes, in fact, just now.
Yeah, and I'd just like to point out you see the cartography, see the accuracy of that map. You're talking about 1620s, 1630s actually.
Yes.
You know, excellent. From Sri Lanka down there, the peninsular part of India, moving west, West Asia. It's fantastic.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about this, which we don't have time for, but I'll just point out one thing. The sun is shining on Italy, on Rome, which is the seat of the papacy. So that would be somewhere here.
Excellent. Thank you, Reshma. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Okay, so this is the interior of the Gran Salone, the Great Hall. You have the dimensions there. It's enormous. If you you get a sense of the scale when you see the visitors over here. Now, let me just mention one thing that I forgot. So I did tell you that you have the central panel and you have the side panels. So there's, I'm just going to call them in clockwise direction, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the central panel, of course, is viewed correctly like this. Okay. Panel number 2 is also viewed correctly like this. So these are actually can be read together. Okay. The central panel and the one below it. The side panels have to be viewed like this. So you really need to move around the room to be able to read the different portions of the ceiling. I'm not sure how clear this is going to be, but let me just try. Just note, even if you can't make out what this thing is, over here, where my pointer is, just note that area. Okay, that is this portion. So to read this correctly, the people who are sitting here, and when they look up, they will read it correctly. Okay, but if you and I are standing here with our back towards the unseen wall, and if we look up like that, it will be upside down. Okay? Don't worry too much if it's confusing. This kind of thing really needs to be seen in situ. When you actually go there, you will know. You'll have to move a certain direction for it to be right side up. The point I want to make is that the people sitting on the benches here, when they look up, the central portion, which is oriented like this, will appear correctly, but what to us standing with our backs to the other wall, this looks correct to us, but this would not look correct to the people sitting here. Okay, okay. A comparison of a photograph taken, you can assume that the photographer was lying on his back in the center of the floor and took this photograph. Okay, so everything is more or less equidistant. The distortions, the center is very clear, and the distortions on the edges are because it's so huge. In the photograph on the right, instead, we see this short panel correctly. Okay, the viewpoint of the viewer, the location of the viewer as he or she looks at a huge and complex work like this makes a huge difference, not only in understanding details, but also in the way you read even large and prominent parts. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So, or before I show you that, let me just show you the main panel and what's happening, okay? So you have two groups. You have an upper group, and I'm looking at the black and white image just because it's a little more, it's easier to read. The color can be distracting. So let's look at the black and white image first, and then we can look at the colored image. You have Divine Providence, which is the focus of the entire composition. She's seated on a cloud bank. There are figures seated below her, okay? There is a group above her, and there is a figure in between the two groups, an intermediary figure, okay? Now, let's look at it in the colored area, and I will focus now. So you have Divine Providence. You have an older muscular man with a scythe. This is the attribute of Saturn, so it represents time. Okay? There are three female figures seated opposite Saturn. These are the fates, the three fates. Divine Providence, the intermediary figure, okay, who has a crown of stars, and Divine Providence is gesturing towards her and the crown. She's being told where to place the crown. Okay? Above them is the upper group. Now, I would like you to note three B's. Okay? Encircled by branches of laurel. Okay? And surmounted by a combination of crossed keys and the papal tiara. Now, when you read the composition, you see not only allegorical figures or personification, or rather not only personifications, but an allegorical reference to the person and the papacy of Urban VIII. So you have the Barberini symbols with the papal symbols. The combination can only refer to one person, that's Pope Urban VIII from the Barberini family. And you have the main figure, which is Divine Providence, who is gesturing to this figure with the stars. And it's debated as to where exactly she's supposed to place the stars. Is she supposed to place them on, most of the sources say she's supposed to place them on the papal symbol. So crowning, basically celebrating the person and the papacy of Urban VIII. Okay, note this little figure on the left. I have a detail and we'll come to that. Okay, but for now, I want you to think about how photographs sometimes often distort the view of a composition, and how this is very important to understand when we're talking about things like illusionism. So before I go further, I will also say even the photographs that are better than the flat photographs, they have a certain degree of distortion too. Let me just explain what I mean by that. So this is where we're standing with our back to the wall, where we saw the seated figures in the photograph earlier. So when we look up, we see the composition, the central panel correctly. There's these figures. This is the personification of Rome. She holds the papal tiara, the personification of religion. She holds the keys. They are above the Barberini bees, flanked by or encircled by branches of laurel. And these three figures towards the bottom of the circle are the three theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity. Okay. Now, when you look up, I see that I'm going to go a couple of minutes, well, maybe a little more than a couple of minutes over time. I'll try to go quick, and I'll try to be clear too. When we look up at this figure, I want you to just look at the figure of Divine Providence in these two photographs. Okay. Same figure, but the effect effect is much more realistic in the one on the right, because the photograph is taken from what is the ideal viewing point of a viewer who is actually in the space looking at the composition. The photograph on the left has the entire composition in one image, which is very helpful if you're trying to just label the different parts. But if you really want to understand how the illusionism works, we need to look at cropped images, okay? Because depending on where the viewer stands, the illusionism works differently. Okay. So I've just cropped out the bottom half of both these images, and you can see the difference. So this is an image that focuses on the entire composition. Look at the figure of divine providence. This is how you would actually see it, the one on the right. And look at the impact of the illusionism. It's much more efficient when you stand at the correct place. Okay. The panel below it is oriented in the same direction. So you can actually read this entire composition as one pyramidal composition. Okay? Beneath it, you have Minerva and giants chasing giants. This story, which I'll come back to, which actually, let me just do that first. No, I'll come back to it later, sorry. Pietro da Cortona, when he was painting this ceiling, took a break and traveled north, okay? And after he came back, he painted this part, all right? The main part, Divine Providence. When he went north, he would have seen paintings like the one at extreme left, which is a Venetian painting. I am not sure what will happen if I close this. I'm just going to try. Hopefully I won't close the presentation. Okay. This is one panel of a combination of ceiling paintings in the Ducal Palace in Venice, where it was very common to have personifications arranged in architectural settings, which were oriented to the view of a viewer standing below and looking upwards. Okay, so that's one of the types of paintings he looked at. The painting in the center is a phenomenal composition based on quadratura. So this is all fictive architecture that you see, and it's the apotheosis or celebration of Saint Clement. This was commissioned by Pope Clement VIII Aldobrandini. So his namesake, Saint Clement, is being received into heaven. This is Clement being received into heaven. You can see the papal tiara here. Papal tiara with fabulous Bisotto and Sue. And here, I think that, I don't know whether this is also the papal tiara, and the cross keys. Okay. So these are the kind of things that Pietro da Cortona looked at to create his composition. Now, I'm going to go a little quickly. I won't go over each, the subject of each panel, but I will tell you this. Every individual panel, especially these two long side panels, has a principal figure who interacts with divine providence. Okay? So remember what I said about the debate in the academy, in which Pietro da Cortona said a good composition will have much complexity and many subsidiary narratives, all of which link back to the main theme. Okay, so this is charity, this is immortality, divine providence, Saturn time, the three fates. Okay, and it's just this portion of the composition blown up over here. You can also see over here the fictive stucco or marble architecture, fictive bronze medallions, So the kind of illusionism that we've already seen in the Sistine ceiling, in the Farnese ceiling, being used in a much more complex manner, in a much more complex, or rather populated composition. Oops, sorry. What did I do? Okay, so on the left, it's a beautiful close-up of the papal tiara, the papal keys, the 3 Bs, and note this little puto over here with the crown of laurel leaves. Every image you see of Dante will have him with a crown of laurel leaves because he is a famous poet. Guess who else in this context was a poet? Maffeo Barberini, who became Pope Urban VIII. So here is the victor's crown, the poet's crown of laurel leaves being associated with the papal coat of arms and the Barberini bees. So yet another reference to Urban VIII. Okay, so we've gone over this. I will go past, but you can just look at the beautiful detailing over here. The same puto on the top left with the crown of laurel leaves. These putti with the branches of laurel leaves. This is worth seeing actually. Look at the foreshortening of these keys. It's really extraordinary. The coloring of the bees. Okay, here's a blown up image of the puto with the crown of laurel leaves. So it's this one. Okay, I will come back to this puto very shortly. Okay, right here. So yeah. So when we're looking at this image correctly, this short part is upside down. And this is where the little puto appears with his, so he appears here. Now I'm going to show you the panel that is beyond this. So what is above the screen, okay, but oriented correctly. So when we look up, this is Hercules chasing the harpies, and there are personifications of abundance and authority. We won't go into that. I will just mention Hercules' club, which was an attribute we saw in Fortitude in Sacchi's work. There is a fictive cartouche here with a club. Hercules' club was usually made of, you would assume, oak or olive wood, but this club is actually sprouting laurel leaves. So it's an association also of Hercules with the Barberini Pope. But what I wanted to show you here is this little puto on top right, okay? Which, if you were to look at the rest of the composition, it reads wrongly, but the puto reads correctly. And if we were to move, the puto would be reaching out as if he were upside down to crown, to offer the crown to Pope Urban VIII, who does not appear in the composition, but is celebrated by it. Okay, these are the side panels. And since we're past time, I'm not going to go into detail over them. I will just say all of them are allegories that reference in one way or the other Pope Urban VIII. So definitely he is being celebrated as someone with the qualities of Hercules, who provides authority and abundance to the Roman people, or rather not just the city of Rome, but all of the territory of Rome, the Roman state. Okay. Below divine providence, you have the figure of Saturn and the 3 fates, and below that you have a representation of Athena chasing the giants. Note the giant at the right and the foreshortening of his left leg. Okay, I'll come back to this. These giants are tumbling. You will remember this story if you were there for the lecture on Mantua, where There's an entire room where the fall of the giants is the main subject, and that is in the Palazzo del Te, in the Sala dei Giganti. So the source of this story was in Ovid, where Zeus, the detail on upper left, hurls his thunderbolt, and that destroys the mountains that the giants had piled up to reach Olympus. In another version of the story written by Claudian, it's not Zeus, but Athena, Minerva, who chases giants away. So over here you have Minerva chasing the giants. There are certain, this is important in the Barberini context because Minerva is also associated with wisdom and the church. So it's another allegory towards, not towards, of the papacy of Urban VIII. Not only is Minerva identified with the church, the giants who are falling, who were arrogant and tried to challenge the authority of the gods, are identified with heretics. So those who broke away from the Catholic Church, who criticized it. So this is an allegory of the defeat of heresy in this case. Okay, the long panel, so here's divine providence. The panel to the right, it has moral knowledge reaching out to divine providence, and there are various narratives with allegorical meaning on the sides, but I just want you to look at the central figure and the way she reaches up with this. So it links this subsidiary narrative with the main theme, the way Cortona had said should be done in a good composition. The opposite side, oops, just one second. Okay, so we're looking at a close-up of this figure in kind of brown and blue robes, and she is a personification of dignity, but dignity as dignity held by high office. Highest office that we know of, that of the Pope, held by the patron, Urban VIII Barberini. Now look at what's happening here at the bottom. There's the Barberini symbol of the sun, if I can figure out how to hide this. Oops. Okay, so here's the Barberini symbol. Here is the personification of dignity of ecclesiastical office. She holds a key, and she holds the caduceus, which is also a symbol of peace. Okay? So a lot of allegorical messages in the entire composition. I'm almost at the end. I would like you to just, oh yes, I forgot to mention one thing, which let me just tell you that because it's interesting. Yeah, so in Giulio Romano's composition on the left, you see the architectural structure crumbling, and you actually see something very similar. No, I don't want this. I want this. Happening here. The architecture is crumbling because the giants are falling, and the stones they piled up are collapsing. Okay, quick comparison with some of the works we've seen earlier, and then I'll stop and answer questions. So on the left, you have the corner of Annibale Carracci's Farnese ceiling vault. And if you remember, you only glimpse the sky at these corners, and there are these fictive terminal figures that bear up the fictive architecture. Something similar happening here. You have fictive stucco or marble figures holding up the structure, and you have fictive bronze medallions. I won't go into the details of the bronze medallions. They are figures from Roman Republican history with qualities that are associated, obviously, with Urban VIII in this ceiling. I want you to look at the foreshortening of this falling giant's foot that we looked at earlier. Okay, and the main point I want to make here is that the foreshortening of this foot looks much more impressive when the viewer is looking at it from an angle, as opposed to when the viewer is looking straight up at this narrative image. Okay, so if you're looking at the angle of the sides, this foreshortening, the illusionism works in a much better way. Okay, final point, and then I'll end. Pietro da Cortona did not do anything stunningly new in terms of visual illusionism as such. The things that he had done, a lot of them had been done earlier. So Michelangelo had already had, you know, the orientation of the central episodes being intersected by the orientation of lateral figures, okay, and depictions. Annibale Carracci and Michelangelo had already done this combination, extraordinary combination of different kinds of materials. So different levels of relief, different types of materials, gilded wood, bronze, stucco, marble, all of that. But what Pietro da Cortona did, which is very impressive and exceptionally well done in this work, is linking the narratives of the side panel seamlessly with the central image without in any way diminishing the importance of the central theme. So everything, the meaning, when you start reading these allegorical meanings, everything relates back to Pope Urban VIII. So even though Pope Urban VIII does not appear in this work at all, or for that matter, in Sacchi's work, he is the one being celebrated through allegory in both these ceilings, which were commissioned for his family palace. Okay, I'll take questions now.
Thank you very much, Reshma. Thank you very much. Once again, it was so beautifully explained and so lucid. And of course, the lovely images that you always share with us. There have been a few questions, some of which you answered in the beginning. There was one about, right at the beginning of the talk, you mentioned about this book. Remember, some participants wanted to know if you could repeat the name of the book that was represented in the etching.
The aegis Barberini. Yeah, if you AEDES, maybe I could type it into the chat.
Okay, you do that.
Yeah, it's got a much longer name, but if you type this much into an internet search machine, you should get it. Why are my caps not working? Okay, I don't know what. Oh, just one moment. Okay, for some reason my caps aren't working, so please bear with me. Okay, it's got a much longer name than that, but that's...
Did you press enter?
Yes,
yeah, here it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
And then while there was this, while for some reason, you know, there was this mention about why the bees were there, I mean, the significance of the bees and the other symbols. So people are asking that, okay, that is okay, it represents the families, but any particular reason to depict it? Was it to establish that this was commissioned by them? Was it to establish that they were the patrons for this?
Self-promotion, absolutely, yes. It's to celebrate the person of Urban VIII who became Pope. So it's not just the bees that are represented. It's not just the laurel. They are represented in connection with the papal coat of arms.
Chelsea, does that answer your question, or would you like to articulate it yourself? If Samiksha could allow you to unmute yourself.
I can see the chat. If someone wants to write it there, I could, right now, I could probably read it.
Yeah, because the sentence question.
Or actually, if the person can be unmuted, that would be best.
Yes, that's what I thought. That will be better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be best.
Yeah.
Chelsea. And when we were talking about those, the various figures with the, you had the triangle, you had the colonna, you had the corona, you had all these. There were two which were not very clear. One was the ear of corn, and one was the snake. Because I think everything else is pretty evident.
So the snake is either immortality or eternity, because it's the snake that is swallowing its tail.
Yes, so this is the one. Yes, this is the one above justice.
Yeah, and there's actually a constellation that has the serpent bearer, serpent holder. I don't know the name. Yes. The other one is Virgo, because the corn and there's something else that related to, I've forgotten what the quality is. I can go back to the slide. I've written it there. Yeah, the constellation is Virgo.
So Mrinal Bhargav, the one above the justice.
Above justice?
Yeah, it's the one with the snake that's eating its tail. Yeah, that circular thing.
I can just go back to that image and we can look at the list, because I can't remember off the top of my head, but I've written it there. So I'll do that. Just one moment.
Sir, this is Chelsea.
Yes, Chelsea.
So my question was, okay, in connection with they're trying to depict nobility or whatever, these the family or whatever, but I'm sure there would be some reason as to why that association with the family. So for example, if you say the Mewad family, the sun is associated because they are worshippers of the sun. So I'm saying if they are denoting bees associated with the family, what was the reason?
Okay, so why the bees for them, for example? Why the colonna for the others?
Yeah, I understand the question now. I don't know why the bees originally were associated with the Barberini family. I don't know the answer to that. But Urban had written poetry about the sweetness of the honey and things. There's actually a reference to that somewhere in the ceiling also through his poetry. The point is not so much about, in this case, I'm not saying in general, because it's a very valid question, why are the Barberini associated with bees? I don't know the answer to that. But in the ceiling, the bees are being associated. It's not that the Barberini are being associated with the bees. It's the bees of the Barberini are being associated with these qualities related to divine providence and divine wisdom, which are virtues of a very high religious importance that are being attributed by allegory to Pope Urban VIII.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm sorry, I don't know why the bees are associated with the Barberini.
Yeah, it's interesting though. Thank you.
Yeah, but this was a very good question, Chelsea, and I'm glad you articulated it yourself. So I think one of the main reasons was, as Reshma said, it's more about the qualities of the bees, because of which people would like to associate themselves with something like that. So, but this is very good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you, Reshma, for addressing it so well.
You're most welcome.
Yes. Reshma, did you get that visual?
I did. Just one moment.
It's on the right of Corona. And
yeah, I'm going to that slide. I thought I'd opened it, but it didn't work.
Yeah, this one. Yes.
Okay. So basically, I'll just read them out. So nobility, this is nobility.
Yes.
With the crown, okay? Nobility with the crown. Then you have eternity with the snake. That's eternity. This is a snake swallowing its tail. Okay. Then justice and the scales, the constellation Libra, fortitude with the club of Hercules, the constellation Hercules. Then sweetness with the lyre. So this is sweetness with the musical instrument, the lyre. The constellation is Lyra. Divinity with the triangle, we looked at that. Beneficence with the ear of corn. Holiness, and which is the one, I guess, purity. Is this the one? This is the altar. So the constellation Ara, and this is the swan, Cygnus, with purity. Was this the question as to what that figure was? I'm not hearing anything.
Sir, can you please unmute your mic?
So sorry. I'm so sorry. So Reshma, the question has been answered. We were talking about that snake eating its tail. That's eternity.
That's eternity.
Beside Corona.
No, but I thought the question was about one of these figures.
No, the question was about that. So,
oh, okay.
In fact, all of them are identified now. So.
Yeah, okay. I'll keep the slideshow on just in case there's a question about the images.
And then and Tracy D'Souza asks that in this context, who are the heretics?
The heretics are the Protestants.
Tracy, did you get that? Could you just repeat it and just expand a bit on it, Reshma?
Sure. So, starting with Martin Luther, actually even before that, there was a lot of corruption in the Catholic Church, and reformers like Martin Luther wanted that addressed. Martin Luther is one of the most famous of the reformers, and he traveled to Rome. He was shocked by what he saw in Clement VII's court, because it was not spiritual. It was not what anybody could really consider holy. Okay, and the excesses, the money being spent on art, on all kinds of luxuries, bothered him very much, and that led him to nail his 95 Theses to the Church of Wittenberg, and that led to the Protestant Reformation. So within the Catholic Church, so Martin Luther was a Catholic, there were other Catholics like him. Some, like Luther, left the Catholic Church. Others remained and kept striving for reform. Okay? But the ones who left, okay, they're the Protestants. They protested against the excesses prevalent in the Catholic Church.
And talking about this, there's an interesting question by Alex Coutinho. He says, why were the personifications of the values feminine?
Okay, so there were emblem books. Okay, I don't have the answer to that. I can't tell you why most of the, I guess most of the values are more prevalent in females. I don't know, but there were a lot of these, to us, like I have to go and look at the list and try to make the association. But for the erudite viewers of the period, they would not have needed this. They would have looked and they would have known what it referred to, because this kind of imagery was so prevalent. Also, there were a lot of aids. There were emblem books that were printed and circulated and which were bestsellers, which had, for example, infinity, and it would have an image of infinity. Some of the most important ones are Ripa, Alciati. They'll have literally eternity. Eternity's attributes are the snake eating itself, a circle. Certain qualities would have multiple attributes. Okay, so it was not something that erudite viewers would have to struggle to understand. Occasionally, and I think that is the case with some of the personifications in both the ceilings we've looked at today, the attributes don't exactly meet the most common ones that were used, and there are slight diversions, and that makes for a little more research to interpret it correctly.
Okay. There's one about the lions at the base of the chair. Is that any particular meaning, or it's a decorative element?
No. So this, let me just go here. So this entire composition comes from two chapters from the Book of Wisdom, okay? Which is, it's not a portion of the canonical Bible, but it's related to the Bible. And the Book of Wisdom is believed to have been authored by King Solomon the Wise. And there are references in the Bible and in the Book of Wisdom to the throne of Solomon, which had the two lions. So it is not just any throne decorated with lions, it is the throne of Solomon that divine wisdom is seated on.
Okay. And Apurva Iyengar is asking that, are there other examples of structures or artworks that the Barberini family commissioned or built in Rome?
Lots. The most, I guess the immediate one that comes to mind that everybody who's been to St. Peter's would know is the baldacchino. So that is the 60-foot tall bronze structure where the high altar is. It's like a canopy with twisted columns. And if you look carefully, it has laurel leaves, the sun, bees, all the Barberini symbols there.
Yeah, so that was Bernini, right?
Sorry?
That was by Bernini.
That's by Bernini. Many of them are by Bernini. Very close to the Barberini Palace is the Triton Fountain. That's also by Bernini. The Fountain of the Bees. What are the other big Barberini?
His brother was also involved, wasn't he?
I beg your pardon?
His brother was also involved.
Luigi Bernini?
Yes.
Okay, as far as I know, the one that's coming to mind right now is the Constantine statue that Luigi Bernini was involved in, but that was a different pope a little later.
Yeah.
I think it was Alexander VII Kiji, if I remember right.
And Apurva had asked about remember Apurva, you were talking about the ponteggio, you were talking about the scaffolding and all that we used and the tools that we used. Reshma is going to be talking about, Reshma, you're going to be talking about Andrea del Pozzo in the next lecture?
Yes.
Okay. Even he, Apurva, had, he's written a trattato, a treatise on for the quadratura, where he talks about the scaffolding. He actually writes a treatise on how to create scaffolds and other things. And in fact, research even for this Barberini Palace, the paintings here, there are notes about what the scaffold was like, how it was built, how many levels it should have, and things like that. Mm-hmm. So that's all there, and I'll give you the reference if you're particularly interested in that. There are a lot of...
I don't know about that. I mean, I know about the treatise, but I haven't read it, so I don't know.
No, this
other than the mathematical part.
Yeah, it's a technical part of this. And there was one question about the colors, what inks were used in the etching. So these were, usually the iron gall inks as well as the inks that would make with carbon and things like that. So, Sonali Iyengar, you have all the details here with us. So just get in touch and we'll give you all the formulations. There have been requests. We have about 10 minutes left. We have a request that could you explain, even if it is in brief, could you explain, even if it is in brief, the images, on the right and left of the panel, the ones that you have left, even if it's short, because people
Sure.
seem to be,
If we have the
waiting for a
time, I
little.
can do it. Yeah.
Just a little. Thank you
Sure.
so much. It's very good. The side panels, both the side panels. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank
No
you.
problem.
And Enrica Cherki and others have, given all the various qualities of the bees for which, so this commitment, hardworking, operosity, work. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving us these inputs. Thank you, Enrica.
Okay. So this central group, so here's Divine Providence. This is the panel to the right. Let me just see if I can zoom in. See this figure on the left? This is Venus, okay? Lying in abandon. And this is chastity, chastising Venus. Okay. On the right, you have Silenus, the overweight, drunk satyr who is a companion of Bacchus, and we saw a representation of him in the Farnese ceiling. These are little cupids. They're different types of cupids. So they're the good cupids and the bad cupids. What do I mean by good and bad? Good as in pure love, and bad as in carnal love. Now let's look at these figures. Okay, so this is moral knowledge. Oops. Okay. So moral knowledge, okay, reaching out to divine providence. We can't see here, but beyond this is divine providence. I'm not sure what this figure represents, but look at what it's carrying. It's a branch of laurel leaves. Okay, this figure, I don't remember. Let me just see. I've written it down. Likely piety. I am not 100% sure, but there is a sacrifice going on. So she has a tripod with a sacrifice. The message, the overarching message. Okay, let me just talk about this. Can you see what's happening here? This is a plow kind of instrument, and there are 3 bees here. This is what relates to some poem that Urban VIII had written about, I don't know, maybe the industriousness of bees or something like that. So there are a lot of references to good and bad behavior. Obviously, lust and gluttony are bad behavior, and moral knowledge and piety are good behavior. This is what you have here. I'm sorry, but I don't know more about what exact incidents or episodes they might relate to, but I'm certain they relate to specific episodes. Now, let me...
Reshma,
Yes.
you've got the panel on the other side also, right?
Yes.
There's one. If with your permission, I'll just read out one, which a little note that Amita has sent for everyone to read.
Sure.
It says the Papal Conclave of 1623 crowned the Tuscan prelate Maffeo Barberini as URBAN, Urban 568. The new pope had been born outside Florence in the little town of Barberino Val d'Elsa, with a coat of arms that bore 3 horseflies, tafani. The family name was in fact Barberini de Tafani. At a certain point in his career, the ambitious Maffeo decided that his heraldic horseflies might eventually prove an embarrassment, and he changed them to busy bees. Thank you, Amita, for this.
Okay, may I ask the source of this? Because it's very interesting and I'd like to read up on it further.
Yeah. Amita, can you give us the source, please? Will you allow her to unmute herself, Samiksha?
Yes, given. Permission given.
Yes,
I posted the link.
okay, you posted the link. Thank you so much, Ms.
Could you just read that out to me, Anupam, because I can't see it right now.
Okay, should I forward it to you?
Just tell me what it is very quickly.
It's it's brill.com.
Brill. Okay, fine. Thank you. Okay, great. Yeah, forward it to me. Thank you.
Then it has the link. I'll send the link to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right. So here you have dignity of ecclesiastical office. On the left, you have the Forge of Vulcan. And so the Forge of Vulcan, who created Zeus's thunderbolt and weapons. I told you that Urban VIII had stocked up weapons. He had built fortifications. He was looking to expand territory. So this is related to the work that he was doing as Pope. Here you have a figure that is bound up, and apparently, I can't really tell, there are piles of weapons below him. So this figure, there's a figure with a trumpet that is fame, and I think the figure of peace that is heading to close the doors of the temple of Janus, because there was the belief that when the temple, during times of peace, the door would be closed. So the idea here is this dignity of high ecclesiastical office, the highest being that of the Pope, held by Urban VIII, was engaged in the protection of the papal state. So he had authorized funds for building up the weaponry, for fortifications, and this was all as a state of preparedness. That is the message here, to maintain peace. In reality, I mean, this is the advertisement. Reality was a little different. Urban VIII was desperate to usurp the dukedom of Castro. He went into a multiple-year war, lost a lot of money on it, trying to get that for himself, for his nephews, and he wasn't the wise. It's not exactly what is portrayed here. This is, in a way, it's propaganda. Okay, so that's how the allegory works. It is saying Urban is like this. He has done all this, which is for the good of the people. Actually, Urban was trying to, he had not so pious ambitions. They were more secular. Okay.
The next lecture, there have been questions about the next lecture. There's Bacicco's Triumph of the Name of Jesus and Andrea del Pozzo's Saint Ignatius in Glory in the Church of Saint Ignatius in Rome. So that's what will be there for the next session. And we will keep you updated for other events and lectures. In fact, Francesca Mendola, the director of the Italian Cultural Center, has been working out other plans and programs so that things can be taken forward.
Okay.
I'll just see if there's any one little thing that we need to pick up, or I think we should end with curiosity. Chelsea says that curious as to why, despite many of these works being commissioned by Christians and even the church, there was a limited depiction of Christ. Did they avoid it for a certain reason, or was there enough narratives and allegories and other symbolism that that was one episode.
Okay, there were other places where Christ was depicted, usually on altarpieces. Also remember that when a work is being created to, I'm using this term very loosely, propagandistic purposes, the life of Christ is not very useful for that, because Christ was all about poverty, humility, not luxury and opulence and exuberance. So I think that may be one reason. I mean, Christ, the only time you hear about Christ in money is him chasing the moneylenders from the temple, not so. There are in churches, you will find celebrations of Christ. In fact, we'll see it next in the next session in Andrea Pozzo's work. Christ is one of the figures. Again, it's a very busy composition with lots of figures, but Christ is the focal figure. And I don't know how else to answer that.
We'll take it up. I think this is a panel discussion question.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Chelsea. Chelsea comes up with these heavy ones. Thanks, Chelsea.
Which is good, which is great.
Excellent, excellent. Chelsea is working as a curator at the Udaipur Palace at the palace in Udaipur. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think Reshma, I will take.
May I just say one thing very quickly? It just struck me. In churches, usually there is Christ as the ruler of the world, Pantocrator, those kind of images, but it's usually in church apses, church domes, the thing in a private commission like a residential palace. I can't think of anything.
Okay. So Reshma, with your permission, I'll thank the CSMVS Museum, the Italian Cultural Center, the Consulate General of Italy, and Citi India for their support in this, and to all of you ladies and gentlemen who've been with us. And it's such a pleasure to share these thoughts with all of you, especially with your pointed questions, very, very gracious inputs, and
information. Thank you.
Yes, a lot of information and your companionship. Thank you. And with prayers to all of the people who are recovering from this pandemic. And well, Eid has just passed us by, and it's been a holy month of Ramzan. And we hope there's peace in other parts of the world also, where things have got precipitated at this time. So good luck, everybody. Stay safe, good health. And we see you the next Saturday, so to speak, after this. And the date for that would be the 29th of May, is it?
Yes.
Yes, the 29th of May with Pietro and Andrea del Pozzo. Thank you very much. Thank you, Reshma. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Lovely to have you with us. Thank you. And Reshma is going to share in the next lecture, Reshma, some reference books for the lectures that you've given, for illusionism related to Baroque, some basic, even a few. We're not looking at a big reading list.
I can absolutely do that. But there's a caveat there. For those of you who are in India like me, it's almost impossible to get the books. Okay. So I will try and look for articles on JSTOR that could be useful, or maybe good websites that are freely available. So I will give you book names, but I need to know specifically what kind of books. Illusionism?
I will, Illusionism. One is Illusionism, one is on Baroque art.
Okay.
Right. And we'll give one for every lecture we've had, Reshma. That'll be nice, if you don't mind.
Okay. That's doable, certainly. Okay.
Just one each. At least we can begin with that. Thank you.
All right. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody. Thank you, Samiksha, for taking care and hosting this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.